Good morning, everybody. How are you doing? Nice to see a few folks out there. I know some of you are going to be watching this live later. Go ahead and start recording this. Yeah, welcome everybody to part 2 of the Magic of Trees. Yeah, thanks for tuning in. Appreciate you being here. Yeah, I have a little story I'm going to share here in just a moment that is not really related to the topic of the day, but those of you who tune in some of these will find this a cool story. But I want to just take a moment and give some thanks for the trees, especially as I'm sitting here drinking a cup of warm, steaming, hot Douglas fir tea with my mug that Mariah, man from Big Island of Hawaii, gave me and my partner Karen. But yeah, I'm looking out my window here. It is a non-rainy but gray overcast day, and I can see a variety of trees just out my window. And those trees are all doing amazing things right now, including exchanging carbon dioxide and oxygen for all of us, providing oxygen. They provide a ton of shelter and food and other things for animals. They also produce a crazy, amazing amount of materials and things that humans have found useful. So, yeah, and thanks out to all of you for joining me this morning, and for those of you who are watching this on replay. I know a lot of you watch this on replay, and sometimes I get kind of behind in my schedule of sending out the email with the video in it, and I always get an email from somebody, Nate, where's the videos? I've been loving the Friday thing. So, okay, so don't worry, I'll get it out as soon as I can. And those of you who are joining me live, feel free to type questions in the chat, or introduce yourself in the chat, or even just say where you're calling from. Yeah, and I'm excited to do this multi-part series on trees. But let me tell you that little story. So I think a lot of you know that I try to reference it quite frequently. I live in the middle of traditional Snoqualmie territory. I live in the town of Carnation, which is near the confluence of the Tolt Snoqualmie rivers. The confluence is actually just right over there. And this is very, as from what I understand historically, like this was one of the central locations and central villages of the Snoqualmie people. And in fact, their tribal headquarters used to be a couple blocks from here, and now it's up in Snoqualmie, I believe. So there's this whole thing called the Snoqualmie Tribe Ancestral Lands Movement, which has really been something over the last year, I think, that they've worked on social media and Facebook and other things to get awareness out about where their traditional lands are, and for people who hike and recreate on their lands and other things, like how to do that responsibly. Well, they have some sort of a resolution for towns and cities about that they can join into being part of the Ancestral Lands Movement and recognizing the Snoqualmie's traditional territory. So my partner Karen contacted our mayor, who actually talks to the tribe quite frequently, but the mayor hadn't heard about this initiative. And so it was just brought up before the city council and the town of Carnation. And so now the town of Carnation has officially signed on to the Ancestral Lands Movement. So pretty cool. And yeah, hats off to Karen for taking some time and energy to do that and having it pay off. You know, you never know sometimes what can be a real positive for folks. All right, well, I want to come back to this vision, this idea of trees, especially coniferous trees, as having something very special to offer us at this time of year. Now, okay, I'm talking about Northern Hemisphere. If you're down in South Africa, or you're in New Zealand, or you're in Australia, or you're in parts of the rest of the world that are below the equator or very close to the equator, this might not be quite as relevant, but you can listen to it in 6 months and then it'll make sense. But there's this sense that for our survival as human beings, especially as we moved away from equatorial regions up into other parts of the globe, colder climates in particular, where there really truly is winter, especially during cooler eras, Ice Age and stuff, trees have played a huge role in our survival as human beings. And this is beyond just the normal role they play every day in, tending to the atmosphere and making sure we have air that we can breathe. And, there's this notion that the trees are like the lungs of the planet. Well, and we'll talk about that in a little bit because it relates to some of the ideas around what is the medicine of these trees. But trees are an adaptation. They're a form of plant. They're a woody plant that doesn't die back. And then there's two basic forms of trees. There's deciduous trees and there's coniferous trees. And deciduous trees lose their leaves every year. So they tend to look at least like they go more dormant. And coniferous trees, cone-bearing trees, needle trees do lose their needles, but it tends to be not all at once, and they don't look bare. Though there's an exception to that, the larch tree, if any of you have ever heard larches. So there is both like an almost symbolic or magical quality to looking at these coniferous trees as they go through the winter, and they're one of the few things that are still green in the landscape. And this is probably why some of our ancestors had the impulse, the desire to bring that greenery inside. And the sort of classical version of that is the Christmas tree. And I don't know how much people actually cut down live trees and brought them into their house. I don't know if that's more of a modern thing or if that was something that people did. It certainly seems like they brought in greenery, this coniferous greenery. And last week, I talked about the uses of those conifers and how in a survival situation, conifers are some of your best friends as practicing survival skills, how they're really useful for getting a fire started. And they provide natural forms of shelter. And they are like these just amazing resources. They can be food. And that a lot of the conifers even have special qualities that make them extra flammable to get a fire going in emergency situations. Like the pitch inside of conifers is often flammable. Today, I'm going to focus a little bit on the magic of trees and the specific medicinal qualities. And I think next week, to wrap it up, we'll talk a little bit more of the symbolic qualities again. But conifers are hugely medicinal. And I sometimes have drawn pictures for people, and I've taught whole classes about, like 3-day classes about the medicine of trees. And one of the things I have people do is I have them draw a picture of a tree. And usually what they'll do is usually they won't draw a conifer, they'll draw a trunk with lots of branches. So we can all visualize a trunk with lots of branches coming off. And then they'll put little leaves on it, or they'll draw a little, kind of squiggly outline around it, almost like clouds. Or maybe they will draw a conifer, and it's like a trunk with branches and smaller branches, and then lots of needles around that. And often it's kind of stunning for people when then you take a piece of paper and you draw a picture of the human lungs and how there's our trachea that comes down, and then there's 2 branches that come out, and then those branch out into all these little tiny branches. And at the end of all those little tiny branches are these little things called alveoli. I think that's the name, alveoli. Alveoli, right? I'm gonna type that into the chat. It's one of those, biological terms. And how let me put that out to everybody so you can see that. So how in our lungs, the alveoli, let me think about this because I sometimes get it backwards. They absorb oxygen that has come in, and then they take oxygen, put it into the bloodstream, and then they pull the carbon dioxide out. So then we exhale the carbon dioxide out, right? And if you look at a tree, the tree is doing like basically the mirror image of that. So trees are their very extremities are actually taking in carbon dioxide, bringing that inside their bodies. They grow with the carbon, and then they expel oxygen out from the very tips of those things, the leaves or the needles. So our lungs and trees have this incredible mirror image biological parallel. And there's not a lot of other examples of that I can think of that are so clear. I mean, there's this thing called the doctor of signatures, where sometimes things in nature have a correspondence in the body, but this is actually like tracked down to a very biological level. So one of the things that conifers are extremely beneficial for is our lungs. And so many people, when I've taught these classes before, we can just do a little visualization. So many people have this experience. Just like visualize yourself like on a mountainside on a warm, sunny day, walking through like a pine forest, and just feel that like warm, like just coniferous, resinous, piney smell coming into your body. And then just feel what it does to your lungs, right? So there's this huge relaxation and soothing and ease that happens when we breathe in that coniferous air. So literally, it's the essential oils that these trees are putting off. So this is directly related to why we bring those things into our houses in the wintertime. So breathing in the scent of pine, juniper, fir, hemlocks, cedars, and there's more than that, of course. One of the exceptions that I wouldn't include would be the yew trees, but breathing in the aroma from those trees is like a natural essential oil, a lot of essential oils. It's like a natural aromatherapy treatment. And having that greenery in our house, especially in the sort of darkest, coldest wintertime, is literally giving us like a very mild antimicrobial, lung stimulating aromatherapy bath in our house, like basically in the air. And the same thing is true if you're outside and you're breathing in the smell from the conifers. Now, that can be enhanced or taken to another level if you take those needles from a non-toxic, non-poisonous conifer, and you put them in hot water and you turn them up to a boil on your stove, and then you reduce it to a low, you will have this steam, this aromatic steam that goes through your house, and you can go up and directly inhale that steam. You can like just let it percolate through the house. If somebody is on the edge of a cold or a flu, it's a great remedy to just have going in the house to help everybody stay healthy. My mom, maybe some of you have this experience. My mom used to basically kind of make her own potpourri. For a long time, I didn't really get what potpourri was or why you would do it. And she would just kind of gather things from outside and then put them in like a little decorative bowl or something and put it in different places in the house. And again, there's sort of almost like a symbolic, magical feeling to that, of like just bringing in things from nature that have the quality of that year. But with the actual like coniferous cones and things, it does actually release a smell. And when I'm talking about potpourri, I'm talking about also like the old school version of that, not like the chemically scented stuff you might buy in the store today, but like, we might actually literally take a bunch of different pieces of conifer, throw it in a pot, and maybe there's like, some people might throw a cinnamon stick in there or orange in there. And then you're cooking this thing that like does put off this incredible smell. So one of the main benefits of those conifers and those coniferous smells is for our lungs. A lot of those conifers too have a benefit if you make a light infusion, you don't like boil them for a super long time. You might bring your conifer needles to a boil and then turn it to low and then drink it. That the tea has a warming, drying, stimulating effect on the lungs and the mucous membranes. For myself, I really love to make a Douglas fir tea. That's my favorite. If I feel like I'm coming down with something, I will often make Douglas fir tea. And a lot of times, if it's a mild cold or something, it's quite effective. Like within 24 hours, everything is resolved. also for those of you, so I have a little bit of allergies and a little like some very mild asthma. It's mostly worse if I eat things I shouldn't eat, like dairy. So if you wake up and you have kind of like sticky mucus in your lungs that's like a white or clear mucus, or maybe in your nose, again, like the Douglas fir is this warming, drying thing. And if you live in a wet and cold climate, just drinking that kind of a tea relatively regularly can be helpful. And I'm drinking some right now, just a little bit of honey in it. So it's quite a wonderful taste too. So another thing that all of those conifers do, and again, you know, kind of going back to the archetypal image of being on this mountainside in the summertime, and there's this warm smell, the warm sunlight comes down, and then you smell this warm breeze of the conifer, you know, scent like going through the whole grove of trees, is they tend to have an uplifting effect. Like part of it is they actually a lot of times help people take a deeper breath and open the lungs and open the sinuses a little bit, but they also have an uplifting effect. Many of them have a slightly antidepressant effect, not in the sense of like a serious, like, oh my gosh, like I need to have medicine antidepressant effect, but just a like, oh, like uplifting the spirits, helping you feel some of that cheer that might be hard to achieve at this time of year. So yeah, like, and that can be in the form of smelling them, the just having them in your house, the tea. Some people really do like the essential oils. The thing about the essential oils, I mean, I'm sure everybody on here knows this, but like you really can't ingest the essential oils, and the essential oils are often dermotoxic or seriously irritating to your skin. So you have to be a little bit careful with some of that. So there is this uplifting quality, this kind of helping with the winter blues effect that a lot of conifers have. That's quite lovely. And yeah, I'm just curious. I'm going to just put a little question out to the audience here, since there's some folks here. I'd love to hear if you have any stories or remembrances. It can just be a couple sentences of like a strong memory associated with pine or conifers that goes along. It can be with the holidays or not with the holidays, the winter holidays. But yeah, if you have any strong memories. So there's this other really interesting effect. And again, remember, we did our imaginary tree. We'll just kind of redraw imaginary tree of like the trunk of the tree, the branches of the tree, right? And then, you know, deciduous tree, it's kind of fluffy on the outside, or like a coniferous tree, it's kind of pointy. There's some pretty fascinating parallels as well between that structure and some structures in our body, including the spinal cord and the brain. And and other people pointed this out to me years later, but I first had this revelation when I was in college, was an undergrad class, and I was taking a biological psychology class. We were literally studying the structures of the brain. And I literally had a spot like outside of my dorm room where I would go sit in this tree. It was an Osage orange tree that had like multiple trunks that grew out, and then all of these branches and leaves. And like looking at the tree, it looked like the brains we were dissecting in class. Like it looked like the structures, the dendrites and those things. And so there, a lot of times, some of these tree medicines have a calming effect on the nervous system as well. So, and I know that can be kind of like contradictory. It's like, well, how can they be antidepressant and uplifting, but also calming? And there are some things that can be regulating that way. The traditional cedar wood that is used in incenses and was used in the temples in the Middle East, those buildings were made out of like Atlas cedar or a specific kind of cedar. That cedar, the essential oil, that cedar wood produces an aroma that people find extremely calming, but also uplifting. So you can get into the medicine of that tree. Frankincense is another one. It has a long history of use as this kind of both calming, but also uplifting medicine. In fact, it's one of the 3 treasures that was brought by the Magi in the story in the New Testament. And maybe I'll talk a little bit about that next week. So some of the other medicinal properties of conifers that are pretty interesting is that when you has anybody, I'm imagining some of the people out there who are tuning in, you've seen some sort of a wound on a conifer before. Has anybody seen a wound on a conifer? And I'm curious, what do you see on that wound? Like, what are some of the things that you see on that those like if there's a branch that's been cut off or there's a gouge in the tree? Yeah, thanks, Josh. You'll see sap, right? You'll see sap that will ooze out of it. And often then it will kind of harden. And does anybody know why the tree does that? Like, what is it doing? Yeah, it's healing. Exactly. And it's also, there's another aspect to it. It's healing. It's like blood. Exactly, Josh. Thank you. So it's like blood. It's like our blood that comes out and then forms a scab. And yeah, Angela, thank you. It's like a scab forming. And that scab is protecting the inside of the tree from infection. And it's protecting it from insects getting in there, but it's also protecting it from fungus or microbial agents. And so many trees, especially coniferous trees, their resin, their sap, their hardened sap, is highly medicinal and has a lot of antiseptic properties. And so they can be made into salves, they can be put on cuts or scrapes, because it's those same microbial agents or similar microbial agents try to get inside our bodies when we get a cut or a scrape, right? And putting some of that medicine on in the form of a sap actually helps, once you've cleaned out your wound with water and soap and things, can form like an ability to have our body protected. And once upon a time, our ancestors, they didn't have grocery stores, they didn't have easy access to clean gauze or clean bandages necessarily very easily. A lot of times they would have to make a natural bandage, and sap from coniferous trees was used to actually close wounds, sometimes even like serious wounds, and it to put the skin together, and it would still be a scar, but you would actually clean it out, make sure there was no debris, and clean it out as best you could, and then you could put some of that coniferous resin over it to actually keep the microbes out and help the skin grow back together. And that might be cleaned, taken and replaced multiple times, or even like sometimes some plant matter put on top of that and then wrapped to prevent infection. So the way a lot of times we can do that in modern times is we can gather some of that sap, mix it in with beeswax and oil and maybe some other plant ingredients, and strain that out, and we can make a really great salve that can be used to put on cuts that we can then use bandages on. So that's kind of a fun medicinal way to use these medicines. You can also make those kind of salves. Salve is kind of like halfway between a solid and a liquid, and it's an ointment that you can rub on. You can make one of those coniferous salves and rub it on your chest, right? Like if you have a cough, like I'm sure some of you have used Vicks Vapor Rub or know of Vicks Vapor Rub, and you rub that into your chest, and then that medicine goes into your lungs and it's absorbed into the skin, and then it's also breathed in at the same time. So there's a lot of really fun ways that we can use those medicines. All right. Yeah, let me see what else. Oh, so this is a cool one. This is specific to pitch pine or pine pitch. It does work with other conifers, but especially pine pitch. And I don't know why it works more effectively with pine pitch. But if you take some of the pitch or a salve made from the pitch, but especially the pitch itself, if you have a splinter, right? You have a splinter, you clean out that splinter and you can't get the splinter out. If you put pitch on there, it will pull the splinter out. And now, don't get me wrong, it can take a couple days, but it will slowly, it's like there's some quality of like hydrophilic, like it's sucking some of that fluid out, and it will help pull the splinter out. which I think is so fascinating because it's like literally like using wood to treat wood, like you're using medicine from a tree to treat an injury from wood. And that has definitely been very useful for me and my family at different times when you have a splinter that's quite deep in the skin and it's just not coming out. Or like you have a splinter, a puncture when it goes in, you get part of the splinter out, but the tip stays in, which is really annoying. It can be quite painful. So conifers have all of these different kinds of medicinal qualities. And so as aromatic medicines for our lungs, as aromatic medicines to calm or soothe our nervous system and slightly uplift it, and then as wound healing medicines, where we're literally using the blood and the scab of the tree to help our blood and our skin, which I think is fascinating. So there's sort of these parallels between our structures and a tree structure. And so, you can go through and then you just start looking at the different trees around the world. And some of the most famous medicines in the world, like frankincense and myrrh, come from trees. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention too that many of the world's incense ingredients come from trees, and they have this sort of aromatic, sacred quality to it, whatever that means to people, but it has this sacred quality. And I think next week, when I'm going to talk a little bit more about the symbolic qualities and some of the magical qualities, and when I say magic, I don't mean anything particular by that, but just sort of the associations we have of like the mysterious, the sacred with the trees. I'll probably talk about that next week. That these famous incenses burned in temples all over the world are often have trees from ingredients from trees are the main ingredients, especially coniferous trees. Like I have some incense upstairs that my wife Karen gave me that's from the Shaolin Temple, and it's a juniper incense from Shaolin. So, well, I'd love to take a couple minutes and see if there's any questions. We've got several of you folks out there. Any questions or comments about this? Like how, what do you think about this? And does this resonate with you and your experience with conifers? And do you have any questions about, them using conifers as medicine? All right, well, feel free to add anything into the chat. To move towards wrapping up, okay, Angela. And Rosalind, you use a forest tea. Kids love it. Awesome. Yeah, it's one of those fun things you can do as a project with kids, with your family, with kids you're teaching in the educational setting. And then you get, I'm assuming too, Angela, that you're probably cooking that outside, either on a fire or on a burner or something. So you have to go gather the medicine from the trees. You have to learn the trees. You have to get some water. You bring it to a boil, and then everybody can have their cup of tea from it. It's pretty special. Any recommendations for teas that's good for asthma? Yeah, Josh, that's a great question. I have this kind of weird thing that has happened to me. I guess they call it like 45-year-old asthma or something like that. It's like as you get older, like sometimes people kind of hit this point and then all of a sudden their body becomes more reactive to stuff. And I was, as a teenager, I had a lot of asthma, a lot of allergies, and I was kind of diagnosed with asthma and then just went away for a long time. And it's sort of come back. So I've been looking into this. So it depends on the kind of, it depends on the kind of asthma. Yeah, it's kind of, it's a fun, it's actually quite common, whatever that is, that reactivity in your mid 40s is kind of strange. So it depends on the kind of asthma. So and what I mean by that is like some people, they have an asthma where it's like a little bit more sticky and mucousy and wet. And so you're going to find that like juniper, Douglas fir, and even cedar is pretty good for that because it's more of a warming and drying medicine. Some people have the kind of asthma that it's a little bit worse with the dry air. And with that kind of medicine, I would stay away from from the conifers because they might exacerbate it. There's a plant that a friend of mine was telling me about that they've now done some pretty cool research on. It does not grow around here, Josh. It's not in our bioregion, but New England aster is this really quite cute and fun little plant that grows out east that they're now finding is actually really useful for asthma. And the other thing I would say is mullein is a really great herb for asthma. So that's another one that a lot of people know about. So yeah, I like this practice too, Angela. Angela's just mentioning in the chat to ask for permission from the trees before taking and giving thanks. That's a great way to just deepen that connection. And one of the things that's really cool about where I live is this time of year there's wind, sometimes wind storms, but it's just wind, and it blows all these pieces off of the trees. So you can literally go walk up and just like pick stuff off the ground, and that's really fresh. You know, I wouldn't recommend doing that after several months or something, but you can pick up things fresh off the ground. But I think one of the pieces I wanted to move towards wrapping up around is this idea of this is all about our connection and relationship to the world around us. And, you know, sometimes I'm on here and I'm talking about like resilience or preparation or emergency preparedness. And this information definitely falls into that category of like, gosh, this could be really useful if I was in an emergency wilderness situation, right? Like knowing how to use, like, say, hemlock or blue spruce sap to heal wounds can be really useful. If there was ever a time where we had less access to modern medicine, for instance, this might be really useful. But I think more importantly is like what I've seen in my own life, my family's life, my students' life, my friends' lives, is that when we participate in this relationship with these beings around us and we understand our relationships more, it's very healing for us, and it seems to be very healing for the world around us. And it just makes us value those trees so much more. You know, it is a difficult time sometimes to live where we live and to see the amount of cutting that goes on. And part of it is we just love trees in our family, but I think it's also because we have a relationship with these trees and they can feel like friends or ancestors or elders that we're having this relationship with. And so it's that much more difficult to see them cut down. Yeah, and the whole practice of Christmas trees is very interesting. My wife was just sending me an article about that and how in some ways having the practice of Christmas trees is actually has this beneficial effect on the planet because we're growing all these trees and we have all this land set aside to grow these trees, which is pretty interesting. Like we have a Christmas tree farm right over there. It's quite big. It provides a lot of habitat. There's barn owls that live all around it, and there's coyotes that run in and out of there, and it's right on the edge of places where the salmon swim up the river. So, well, yeah. So I hope everybody found this interesting. You know, just kind of putting it together. Like, there's a lot of survival uses, and there's a lot of medicinal uses, and the medicinal uses, you know, are pretty simple to find ways to incorporate into your life. And there's a lot of different conifers out there too, and each of them have their own nuances. So just learning the conifers in your area. So for instance, where I live, it's like Douglas fir, Western hemlock, and Western red cedar are the three main ones. But there's also grand fir, and there's noble fir, and then there's spruces, and then there's Engelmann spruce, and then there's blue spruce, and all of them have these different things about them. Subalpine fir. And you go to different bioregions around here, like you go up like 1,000 feet or 2,000 feet, 6,000 feet, all of a sudden it's different. Like those who's around, what trees are around changes. And so just learning those nuances can be really powerful. And I hope that if anybody has brought any greenery into their home, they've got a wreath or they've got cedar you know, over the fireplace. And I know not everybody practices those traditions, but maybe you have a different relationship to those things now. And to realize it doesn't necessarily have a specific religious connotation. It's just probably a remembrance of our ancestors just bringing in green stuff in the dark time of winter to help everybody feel a little bit better. So, all right. Well, any last questions or comments before we wrap up for today? All right. Well, we're going to do one more of these next week. It will be on trees, and we'll continue. We'll review a little bit about the survival purposes and the medicinal purposes, but then we'll talk about the deeper significance, symbolism, magical qualities, even the spiritual qualities. We'll talk about some of the sacred incenses. We'll talk about our deeper relationships with trees. And all right, everybody. Well, have a lovely day, and thank you. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and those of you who are watching this later, enjoy and have fun. And thanks for tuning in. All right, bye everybody.